Welcome to Watchtower History. Join us as Peter Gregerson tells Watchtower History the story of his life in and out of the Watchtower Organization, and behind-the-scenes stories about his friend Ray Franz and the writing process and impact of Franz's books, Crisis of Conscience and In Search of Christian Freedom. Jim Penton suggested I talk to you and ask what your story is. So in your story, how did your family become Jehovah's Witnesses? How back does it go?
My dad and mother and my brother and I moved from Council Bluffs, or from out that way anyhow, to Clinton, Iowa. He was working on the Chicago Northwestern Railroad as a welder, track welder, and so we moved there in 1931. And there was an old lamplighter. In those days, they had people that would light the switch lamps for night. And his name was Carl Mead. He's a great man in many ways. My dad started talking to this man who loved God and who loved the Bible and who could explain things from the Bible. And my dad apparently was, at that time, was very interested. For some reason, I don't know what the background of that was, but anyhow, he started, and because I was the oldest child, I was the one he took along with him to the meetings, and it was an old, drafty Kingdom Hall over a drugstore, and that's where we started in 1931, 32.
So you were just a little baby, pretty much a little child when you started with Watchtower.
3 years old, and so I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And in those days, you have to understand that there's very little comparison between the intensity of the witnesses in those days compared with the witnesses that I've known in recent years. The intensity was so great. It was the only thing that you lived for. It was on your mind night and day, and you were constantly reaching and stretching and trying to help God get the announcement of his kingdom out. And so I got swept into that kind of an environment where every person there was what today would be called a saint, just so driven by their intense love for God and their desire to be a benefit to other people. And in the fifth grade, we had moved for my fifth grade in school. We had moved to a new school district, and the first day of school, the teacher said, "Please all stand and salute the flag." That was 1938, and at that time in Iowa, there was a fair amount of patriotism, I guess. And the teacher, when I told her, I said, I save all my worship for Jehovah, and I can't give to anything else. And that in those days, you put your hand on your heart and then reach that hand out to the flag. And that was an act of worship.
Yeah, that was a little bit different back in those days.
And I couldn't do that. And then they did away with that gesture because that was the same gesture that was used by Hitler in Germany. But anyhow, that started a teacher that was determined, not that day, but every day of that school year. And we just got started that day. And she would send me in the corridor some days. Some days she would stand me up and tell me again why you won't salute the flag, and then she'd ridicule it. And it was picked up by the kids, and they had all kinds of names for a crazy religion that didn't respect the flag, and so that resulted in fist fights, and which were common in those days. And
can I ask you, Peter, were you doing that on your own, or because your parents were making you?
Well, they didn't make me do anything. They let me know that God, Jehovah, would not be pleased with that, doing that, and so I just decided that I would not do that. I couldn't do that. I told her, the teacher, plainly, I said, I can't do anything different. This is an act of worship, and I can't give worship to anything else but to Jehovah. And she ridiculed me, and all that year, every day of that school year, as I remember it, I had a lump of lead in my gut, and knowing that I was going to go back in there and we're going to start it all over again today, and every day. And I grew to hate school, not the teacher, but school. And as a result, I didn't do well. I did up until then. I really loved school, but then I came to hate it. And as a result, I was truant, and I was a rebel, and I attended most of the grade in 7th grade, but in 8th grade, I just wasn't going to have any more part of it. And so when I came to the end of the 8th grade, the teacher said, well, we can't graduate you, but we are, because we think maybe you can get straightened out in high school. And I never went a day to high school. I was kind of a mixed up kid in many ways, and I went on a bumming trip out to California to see the world with freight trains and hitchhiking, and I ran into 3 different events that convinced me that God had saved my life. I can't figure out why, because I didn't consider myself worthy in any way of that. But how else do you explain 3 hobos in a rail car at the middle of the night deciding that they were going to take my clothes and kill me? And they didn't. I stood in the doorway and threatened to take 2 of them out the door with me if they came. And the next day I was on top of a fruit express over 100 miles an hour in those days, carrying fresh fruit to the eastern markets, and it went into a tunnel that I thought was going to kill me and didn't. And then a couple of weeks later, when I got home, I got a job at building a tower for corn in Clinton, Iowa. And one night I didn't go to work, and that was the night somebody put some sloppy cement in there, and some of my buddies went crashing down 60 feet or so into the cords and the cables, and were torn to pieces. And I guess I just about had a nervous breakdown. I couldn't figure out why God would save me, but my religious background is seeing everything in terms of God. There was no question but what God had saved me, but for what? And finally, my folks convinced me it was to be a pioneer, and so they kind of crowded me into being one, and I started my pioneer ministry in 1948. I just turned 20 years old, and at that time it was a little congregation, and I was quickly made the overseer of the congregation, and then a year or 2 later, I was made the congregation overseer in Peoria, Illinois, the biggest congregation in Illinois outside of Chicago, and they had some big serious problems, and I was taken in there to do that. And then they asked me to move to Davenport, Iowa for the same problem. There's another big congregation that had big troubles, and I was sent over there. No guidance, just do what needs to be done to get this congregation straightened out. And that was the beginning of my life with not only as a Jehovah's Witness, but as a servant in the congregations, and I went from there. In the meantime, I had to get a job, and I got started in the grocery business, and starting my own fruit stand, and that led into working for supermarkets, and so it was kind of a parallel.
Now you work for some big chains. I know in the Midwest here we have Piggly Wiggly. You work for them. Super Value was another one.
Super
Correct?
Value, and I don't know exactly why, but anyhow, I made a great deal of progress in it, and ultimately I was in Champaign, Illinois, the vice president of a large company there, J.M. Jones Company, and Super Value Company. And I was also the congregation overseer and watchtower conductor for the Champaign-Urbana congregation.
That's pretty amazing, Peter, for somebody who only finished the 8th grade.
Yeah,
it's really amazing.
So. And well, but it wasn't as though I didn't have any education, because I did well at selling groceries. I was sent to many business school meetings by Harvard and UCLA and the National Grocers Association and so on. So I picked up some education that was a benefit to me along the way. But and of course I had some background being trained in the Theocratic Ministry School for public speaking, and so all of that worked together for good in the grocery business. And so finally, I came to the conclusion in 1968 when they started talking about Armageddon coming in 1975 that I had some problem with that.